Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Equipping ELLs podcast. I'm Beth Vaucher, and today we're going to talk about a framework that I truly believe can make a huge difference in the language development of our students. And it's called Talk for Writing. Sounds pretty great, right? Talking, writing, that's what we want our students to do. In this episode, I'm going to be walking through how Talk for Writing supports ELLs in all four domains of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. If you're a teacher who's looking for a way to make language learning more accessible and engaging to scaffold your lessons easily, this is really a great framework that you are going to want to incorporate into your classroom. So let's dive in and talk more about what Talk for Writing is. Now, the reason I want to give you a little background about why I want to bring this to you today. I have seen Talk for Writing being used at my kids' school. My kids go to a British bilingual school. So what's really interesting is there are a lot of amazing language support strategies and frameworks that the British system uses that are things I've never seen before. And so my eyes have been opened as I saw class after class school-wide incorporate this Talk for Writing framework. It is powerful with your language learners. There's a few different reasons why I love it, but mainly I love it because there's an oral focus. Right at the beginning, you're going to be expressing everything before you're writing. You know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back a second and let's define and talk a little bit more about what Talk for Writing is, and then I'll tell you why I love it and why I think you're going to love it too. Talk for Writing is a framework designed to help students develop writing skills through the foundation of oral language. I know that if you've listened to any of my podcasts before, you know what a fanatic I am about the importance of that oral language piece and how so often we skip that. Think of how many writing lessons we've given where we're not creating that writing lesson through a foundation of oral language. So that's exactly what Talk for Writing is. All right. So do I have your attention yet that this is a powerful strategy for our language learners? The idea really is simple. Before students can write effectively, they need to have the vocabulary, sentence structure, and storytelling skills to express their ideas clearly. Do you agree? Now, with this framework, you will naturally allow that to happen. Now, the beauty of Talk for Writing is that it's scaffolded, meaning that it's adapted to students' levels. This framework focuses on oral language and storytelling as the foundation for writing. It's hands-on, interactive, and visual, things that are crucial when working with language learners. Now, here's some other reasons why I love Talk for Writing. One is because it incorporates oral storytelling. You're going to be using tons of verbal expression before writing. There's also a ton of opportunities for modeled support. You're going to be providing your students with rich language experiences through both teacher modeling and peer modeling throughout this whole framework. There's also a ton of visual supports like story maps and graphic organizers that your students are going to use and become familiar with. That's going to help them get to that writing piece. There's scaffolded language practice throughout the whole framework where students are going to be provided with language structures and supports at their various levels and with different complexity as you go throughout this. And then there's interactive activities, which allow students to collaborate and practice in a safe, supportive environment. So if you have ELLs, if you're teaching ELLs, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you have probably noticed that oral language often comes before writing. And this is exactly why Talk for Writing works with all your students. Even your monolingual students are going to really advance further in their writing when they're given an opportunity to orally work on it first. It really helps build a strong foundation in speaking and listening, which they are going to transfer into reading and writing. Now, I want to walk you through exactly what the framework is so you can be thinking about how you can take this and adapt it and use it with your students. I'm going to take it from the lens of how I've seen this being used throughout my kids' school, as I've worked in the school, as I've seen what they're bringing home, and just seeing the power behind using this framework as they connect it to the content that they are learning. So, first, let's dive into how it actually works in the classroom. I'm going to walk you through each step, really talking about a real example, so that by the end, I want you to be able to see how powerful this framework can be and how, like I said, you can pick and choose and apply it to what you're teaching right now. Now, the first step is to look at the content that you are teaching or that your students are doing in the homeroom classroom if you're doing all push out support. Look and see, what are they learning in the homeroom classroom? What is the content that I can connect this to? So once you know the content that you are teaching during this, 4-6 week block, you're now going to choose a very rich, authentic literature. And you want to pair that with what you're reading. So if you are doing a book on or a study on the rainforest, you're going to find a really rich literature, a children's book, something that's not a chapter book, but something that your students can go deep in, because that book is going to be used for the Talk for Writing, and that's going to be used throughout the whole 4 to 6 week unit. So you want to find a book that's really engaging. My daughter's class was doing a unit on electricity, and they read a book about the king who was afraid of the dark. And it was a really fascinating story that had a ton of rich characters, a story, a plot, a climax, all of these rich pieces to it. And it also connected with the content that they were learning. So really take time to choose wisely a book that you can pull a ton of different things out of, because it's a rich text. Now, if you're not sure where to begin, classic literature is always a great start. So let's take the example of a story like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? We're going to choose that story to be woven throughout our whole unit. The first step is going to be beginning with oral storytelling. This is a really critical step for ELLs because it gives them the opportunity to practice using language in a low stakes environment before they even pick up a pen. So if we use a book like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, one, they're probably familiar with it. Two, maybe they know it in their native language, right? So there's already some connections happening. And what you're going to do is you're going to start by telling the story to your students, but instead of them just listening, you're going to have them retell parts of the story with you. So you might say something like, Goldilocks went into the house, and what did she do next? And you'll ask them to respond, she tried the porridge, right? You're giving them the language prompts. So this is where language structure comes into play. It helps students by prompting them with sentence frames. First, Goldilocks did this. Then she did this, and so on. So you're building that language framework as you start this oral storytelling process. What this does is it gives students a chance to practice their language orally before they ever write. It builds their fluency and confidence because they're doing it in a group, right? So you can have so much fun with this. You can share the video first. You can tell a story first. You can use it without the book and use puppets, and then you can bring in the book. There's a ton of different ways, but you want to begin with that oral storytelling piece. You're then going to move on to story mapping and visual support. So this is a really key piece to this, and something that your students are going to come back to time and time again. Once they've done the oral storytelling, you're going to incorporate now a story map. Now, like I said, this is really going to last over 4 to 6 weeks. So this is something that you are going to refer back to and build upon as you're going throughout your content unit. These visuals help students organize the key events of the story and understand how stories are structured. How often do you see your students struggling with organizing the key events and understanding how stories are structured, right? That's why I love this framework, because it helps them see the story structure. It plays with a different story structure so that they can begin to learn the process before they ever get to writing their own stories. So let's keep going with our Goldilocks. On the board, I might draw a simple beginning, middle, and end story map. And we work together to fill in the blanks. The beginning, Goldilocks enters the house. The middle, she tries the porridge, she sits on the chairs, she sleeps in the bed. And the end, the bears come home. Now, What I love about story maps is that they make the story structure tangible and visual. For language learners, visuals are incredibly helpful in making abstract ideas concrete. Now, I want to show you some examples. This is my daughter's example, and this is when she was in kindergarten. So she was really in a pre-writing phase at this time, but it doesn't matter if they're in kindergarten or if they're in 5th grade. You begin with a story map and you allow students to draw the story first. Again, it's removing that fear of having to write and having to put all these things together. Let them draw it out. So, as you can see here, let me hold it up. All right, this is her story map. Look at all that detail that she included. She learned through modeling, and this was after they've done it multiple times, but to follow the story map, you can see the arrows. Okay, so she used her visuals and retold the story in her own words. Now, it begins with the story map. And now, what opportunity does it lend for your students to do? Retell the story in their own words. Now they're using their oral language and they're using that visual support that they drew to retell the story. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of this is modeling. So the first time you do this, you might do a lot of it together and they might not do it on their own yet. And that is okay. But you're going to gradually release that every time you do it. And I've seen this happen because every 4 to 6 weeks, they have a new book that they use to connect with the content and they go through the same process. And I can see how they're able to do it. Even a kindergartner now knows exactly what a story map is. They know what's a purpose. They know exactly what they're supposed to do. They know how to retell. Those things are so crucial for our language learners. And this framework helps it to happen naturally. So after your story map, we're going to move into a shared writing. This is where we begin to write the story together. For example, I might write Goldilocks went into the house and saw, and we brainstorm as a class the words to fill in the blank, like a big chair, a bowl of porridge, again, shared writing. By doing this, students start seeing how sentences are constructed and have a chance to contribute ideas. For our English language learners, this step is essential because they can experiment with language. And you're right there to support them with scaffolds like vocabulary list and sentence frames. So this is where it's already really easy to know what type of support your students need and give them the right scaffold in this framework. So you're going to do a shared writing together. Now, this is what I love about this framework. Can you tell I'm excited about this? After you've practiced the story together, it's time for independent writing. Now, each part of this you can extend, you can go deeper on, you can make it faster. So I'm just kind of giving you a very brief overview. Don't worry, in the show notes, we'll share a link to the website that goes way more in depth, provides way more examples. There's trainings. It's incredible. I promise you, you will not be disappointed if you go and check it out. But I want to just give you a brief overview so you can be thinking about how you can even just take pieces of this and begin to apply it in the lessons you're teaching. So the next step after you've practiced the story together, it is time for independent writing. This is where students are going to write their own version of the story or create a new one based on the structures they've learned. So, for example, I might give them a sentence starter. Once upon a time, there was a, and encourage them to write the rest of the sentence with the vocabulary they've practiced. Now, I might provide support like sentence frames or word banks, depending on their language level, and I'm there to help guide them through any tricky areas. At this point, students are able to take what they've practiced orally, they take their story map, and they can apply it in writing. Okay, there's a lot of scaffolds that are already in place where they can start to do this independently. Now, let me give you a better example of what this looks like. My other daughter, when she was in 2nd grade, I told you about how they used a book when they were doing their electricity unit called The King Who's Afraid of the Dark. And so they took that same outline, that same story map, and they created their own version of the story. So they used that example that was modeled to them, and then they came up with their own version. And so she, my daughter, created a story called The Queen Who Banned the Owls. Okay, so the story they read was The King Who's Afraid of the Dark, who didn't want light in the castle. And so she took that, she traded out the king for a queen, and she traded out the light for owls. So now you can see that it has the same structure of the story that they read, that they went through, they modeled, they did a story map, but now she's putting her own twist on it, which helps kids who are reluctant writers to really feel safe because they have a structure. They know kind of the flow they're going to follow, but then it also gives them that freedom to be creative in their writing as they take on their own form of that story. And this is coming from a student, my daughter, who is a reluctant writer. She was not someone that could easily come up with ideas. Her flow really struggled, but because she had that, I mean, she was writing front and back and really was so excited about what she came up with because she felt confident having that framework already in place. So, giving your students, again, this is going to take a couple days, even a week or two, if you want to really do it well, of giving them that time to use the story map, use the vocabulary that they've learned, and create their own version of the story. So, if it's something like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, they would change out those characters. Now, think of how many different ways you can also incorporate all of those fractured fairy tales and all those other versions that are already out there. Model those, talk about those, and then again, give them that opportunity to create their own version of it and see what they come up with. It can be a really fun activity that they don't even realize they're writing because they're having fun. Now, Talk for Writing isn't just about teaching the technical aspects of writing. It's about helping students build confidence in using the language, right? This is what our English language learners need. When you first start, many ELLs might feel shy or unsure about experimenting with new words or sentence structures. But I promise you, through oral practice, it's scaffolded writing, students can generally feel more confident in their abilities. By allowing students to start speaking and writing in a supported way, they begin to feel less fearful of making mistakes. In fact, when they start using the language orally first, it really reduces the anxiety around writing. I've seen it myself. Students who were initially hesitant to speak in English became more willing to take risks with their language as they gained practice. This also is a really great framework to allow students to, during their story map, maybe write a few words in their native language. Let them use their L1 as they're thinking about the story that they heard, as they're digesting it, as they're retelling it. This opens up the opportunity for you to easily be able to do that. Now, something you can continue to do after they do their own form of the writing, and this is what my daughter's class did, was they did a acting out of the story. So again, you're bringing in a rich oral language opportunity. You're bringing in storytelling in the classroom as they're working with peers, as they're taking on different characters, as they're retelling the story that they've become very familiar with. And they presented it for the parents. And so it was a really great way to bring in the parents, to bring in other staff members, to see the hard work. After 6 weeks of really going in depth on one story, it was incredible to see what came out of it. So they had small groups, they acted out different parts. And it was just a great extension way to continue that oral language development and build that confidence of speaking with our language learners. Now, feedback is a huge part of Talk for Writing, especially because students are getting multiple opportunities to improve their language at every stage. So, for example, during the oral storytelling, I might give feedback like, great use of the word delicious. Now let's try adding a little more detail. Delicious could be super sweet or hot and yummy, right? You're just taking those words and what they're using and expanding a little bit. Just checking in, encouraging, providing feedback. After the writing phase, you might encourage students to reflect on their own work. Look at your story map. Did you include the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? You don't have to go and have to do that all yourself. Teaching them to go back and use all of the resources that they've built up over the 6 weeks that they've worked on this one book, and using those resources is going to help them become more independent in moving forward in their writing, in their just learning in general. So it really gives them a chance to self-assess and recognize their progress, right? We always want to be building that confidence of, wow, look at how far you've come. Look what you created. That's what our goal should be as the teacher. So, here are a few tips for teachers if you're looking to implement Talk for Writing. One, start small, right? Everything. That's kind of our first tip always is just beginning with a simple story and use basic sentence structures. Even if you take a familiar story, maybe one you've already been reading to the class, one you've been looking at and working with, and maybe just adding in that story map element. I promise you that is going to be an amazing way for your students to have that support for when they go to write. So for me, the biggest ways would be choose a really great text, incorporate oral language with it, opportunities, and that story map piece. So add in those visuals, story maps, look at the pictures, graphic organizers, use those for a couple different books so they can really see the power of creating their story maps. And what's really simple is you don't have to make it anything fancy, right? Like I showed you here, that's just a white piece of paper. You don't have to have anything printed. You don't have to do anything out of the ordinary. You're just teaching them how to structure the story, how to retell the story through pictures. And that is very powerful. And be patient. This process takes time. Like I shared with you, I am just giving you a really brief overview because I've seen firsthand how incredible this framework is to set up and to have it running in your classrooms, in your lessons, so that you know your all language levels are getting supported to really grow in all domains through really great text. And that's what we've seen works, right? When we can connect content and teach it in context. And that's where they build their knowledge. That's where they build their skills. That's where they build their language abilities. So this is one of those things that if you just start to dabble in it, and if you start to read a little more about how it works, maybe attend a training, maybe check out some more podcasts, we can link some below, and just hear about how teachers are using this, I know and I believe that you will be inspired and start to implement some of these things in your own lessons. So, to wrap up, Talk for Writing is a fantastic way to support language learners in building their skills across all 4 domains. It's scaffolded, it's a hands-on approach that empowers students to practice and experiment with language in a safe and structured way. I encourage you to try some of the steps in your classroom. Start with simple storytelling, use visual supports, and build from there. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Equipping ELLs podcast. I hope that you're enjoying this series on easy to implement frameworks that really help boost all 4 domains. These types of frameworks, I promise if you start to get even one of them set up, you're going to start to see what a difference it makes on you as you're teaching and what a difference it makes on your students as they know what to expect, as they see things that are really helping them have the structures and scaffolds in place to grow in their language learning. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Equipping ELLs podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to share your experiences as you try to implement some of the Talk for Writing framework that I shared today. I'm here to help and support you in any way that I can as you continue to equip your English language learners. I'll see you next time.